Hey guys, Matt Smith back here with you. Week 3 SEC recap video. Wild day yesterday. I'm looking a little raggedy this morning, I think. It was 1:34 a.m. Central Time when I finally pulled the plug on the day yesterday after that wild Fresno State UCLA ending. So a lot to get to here. We will start with Alabama and Florida, a game that I did not think was going to be that competitive for four quarters. It didn't look like it was going to be in the first quarter. Alabama storms out to a 21-3 lead. Then I think they may have just kind of shut it down a little bit for a short time, knowing, hey, our offense isn't quite to the efficiency level that it was a year ago. Let's not make mistakes. Let's protect Bryce Young. And let's try and get out of here on the strength of our defense. And that worked for a while, but Florida found some things there. Emory Jones, that speed option, really tested the Alabama run defense. I was surprised how successful they were. Todd Grantham's defense buckled down and made some plays, and that game got really interesting late. So as far as takeaways really from that, I do have some concerns about the Alabama run defense. Again, Dan Mullen's such a great X's and O's guy. He found some weaknesses, some ways to expose that Alabama defense, and did a really nice job, I thought, throughout that game. Bryce Young was fine, still playing turnover-free football. Again, that lapse around the middle of the game kept things interesting. Last year's offense would not have had a lapse like that where they just kind of shut it down for 4 or 5 series and kept Florida in the game, and they took advantage of it, finally getting close, getting the game-time 2-point conversion attempt that came up unsuccessful. Really great effort from Florida. Again, I don't have major concerns about Alabama, but I do think they exposed some things. And with their next big game coming up in 2 weeks against a red-hot Ole Miss club, I think there is some concern in that game for Alabama. A busy 2 weeks ahead for Pete Golding's defense. I think they get ready for Matt Corral and that Ole Miss offense. And after 2 weeks where the offense really looked pretty sharp, maybe not quite to the levels of last year, I think this was definitely a dip to what I was expecting this year, where the team would be more balanced offensive, defensively, where they would struggle offensively, have some lapses where they go 3 or 4 drives with no points. And that happened. That left the door open for the Gators, and they took advantage of it. And for the second time in about 10 months, a really tough loss for Florida where they fought back but just ran out of time to complete a comeback. So 31-29 Alabama, great game. Enjoyed it. Loved hearing 90,000 people rocking out Tom Petty there in between the third and fourth quarters at the Swamp. Alabama had a lot of penalties, so they did their job, the Gators crowd there. It was fantastic atmosphere and great seeing college football back in the atmosphere like it deserves. The night game, Auburn and Penn State, entertaining. I wouldn't say it was clean and crisp, but it was a lot of fun to watch. Officiating was a mess. You had the missing down early in the game where there was a questionable intentional grounding call on Penn State. Something must have gotten screwed up with the down markers. Penn State ended up punting on third down. We had some other questionable calls in that game. A terrible targeting call, I thought. Obviously, that's who knows what they're going to do when they go under the hood and look at the replay for targeting. But Jacoby McClain got kicked out of the game. He'll miss the first half of next week's game. No big deal, just Georgia State in terms of that. But I hate seeing a good player get kicked out of the game for what was really a shoulder-to-shoulder hit on the Penn State player. So I thought a bad job there by the officials. Had some other shaky calls. There was an intentional grounding that Bo Nix appeared to have made, was not outside the tackle box. They let that one go. Some other fourth down call on Penn State. They ran a defensive tackle, direct snap. Looked like his forward progress was stopped, but I don't think they ever came in and blew the whistle, and he ultimately fell forward across the line, but they did mark him short. Just a sloppy night, I thought, for the officials overall, and more on SEC officiating to come. You just stay tuned. We got a bigger story than that. As far as the game itself, I thought the skill position players for Penn State were the difference. Jahan Dotson's an All-American candidate receiver. He was fantastic. And their guys made plays, did not make mistakes, and Auburn's receivers did. They had some drops. They had the fumble early in the second half on that gadget play that went completely awry. A couple of trips where guys couldn't keep their feet, which would have been big plays. So I thought just kind of a mess from the Auburn receiving core. We knew this wasn't a great unit, but a disappointing night for them. Tank Bigsby ran well. They had a great drive in the second half to cut it from a 2-score to a 1-score game. But overall, I thought Penn State's front did a pretty decent job with them. And like Florida, awesome atmosphere in State College. It's unique with the whiteout. I don't know if it's better or first, second, eighth, ninth in the country in terms of atmosphere, but it's unique to Penn State with the uniqueness of that stadium there, having so many additions that make it kind of look just kind of like a patched together duct tape old stadium that rocks every time Penn State makes a big play. But between that and the whiteout, Penn State's uniforms, it's kind of a unique setting, and that's what's so great about college football is those unique traditions from school to school. SEC Big Ten on campus, couldn't ask for anything more. Again, sloppy at times, Coaching decisions, didn't love Brian Harsin kicking a field goal down 4 on 4th and 1. Didn't like that. The fade on the last real shot Auburn had on 4th and goal. Why you're running a fade with a bad receiving core, that just makes no sense. Get Bo Nix on the move. Give him a run pass option, see what he can do. Penn State, again, the 4th and 1 that they might have gotten but was ruled short. Why are you giving the ball to your defensive tackle? James Franklin's done that since he's back at Vanderbilt, taking the ball out of his best player's hands, but I think he outthinks himself sometimes. Didn't really like that. So between that and the officiating, not a really well-played, well-coached, well-officiated game, I thought, but a lot of fun. And again, credit to the atmosphere. Great job by the Penn State fans to have Beaver Stadium rocking again. The other big officiating story yesterday, Mississippi State and Memphis. You probably saw the play. Mississippi State punted, tried to down the ball inside the 10-yard line. The rule is to down the ball, you have to actually possess the ball. You can't just touch it with your hands, even if the ball's not moving. So Mississippi State did that. The Memphis player, Calvin Austin, heads up, realized that they didn't do that. So he comes in and picks up the ball. Meanwhile, an official is coming up from the sideline, ready to blow the play dead. I didn't really hear a whistle on the replay. You couldn't really tell, but he was signaling like the play was dead and that he deemed Mississippi State did enough to down the ball, when in reality, if you watch that play, they did not. So they let that play go. Austin scoops it up, runs it back 94 yards for a touchdown. It was 21-17 Memphis at the time, so Mississippi State would have had them pinned back, hoping to get a quick stop and flip field position. Instead, Memphis runs it back, goes up 11. State rallied late where they had a 2-point conversion to tie it, much like Florida. Same score, 31-29. But Memphis held on to win on the strength of that surprising touchdown. So mistakes were made on that play, both by the officials and by Mississippi State. Mississippi State probably could have ended all that by actually downing the ball. I think the official coming in confused them, caused them to freeze, thinking the play was over, which technically it was. So all in all, poorly officiated, but Mississippi State players did not understand how to properly down the ball. So it starts there. I put more of the blame on the officials because they need to know the rules. That's their one and only job. But still, a mistake by the Bulldogs as well, and potentially one that cost them the game in their first loss of the season. Tulane-Ole Miss, late night game, long weather delay there in Oxford, but the Rebels picked it up early, even on a sloppy track there at Vaught-Hemingway. Matt Corral, fantastic, 7 total touchdowns. Running game had close to 400 yards. Corral had 4 rushing touchdowns. I think he had 13 carries, some by design, some on scrambles. Surprised they were letting him get hit that much with Alabama coming up, but he's the best quarterback in the country right now. Inconsistent play early on from Spencer Rattler, from Sam Howell. Keaton Slovis at USC got hurt yesterday. It's Corral, I think, by a wide margin right now. And that Ole Miss defense continues to play fine. They're a middle average defense, and that's all you need with this offense. Is it enough to beat Alabama in 2 weeks? I don't know about that, but certainly enough for this team to win 10 games and get 10 for a New Year's Six bowl. Great start to the season for Lane Kiffin and the Rebels. They're off next week, and then can't wait for that showdown in Tuscaloosa in 2 weeks. The other second conference game of the day, South Carolina, Georgia, kind of what we expected, 40-13 Bulldogs. JT Daniels back starting after missing last week, looked really sharp. Bunch of big plays early in the passing game. Adonai Mitchell is emerging as a freshman receiver who's going to contribute with George Pickens out. Looks like they got Kyrus Jackson and Jermaine Burton back together working. Brock Bowers, the tight end, also a freshman. So I think the combination of Bowers and Mitchell adding to this receiving core, even if they don't have Pickens at all this year or not until late in the season, I think gives this passing game the explosiveness it needs. The running game is fantastic. Again, they got their core 4 backs, all do things a little bit differently, but all very good. And that worked well. Defense finally did allow a touchdown, but it was garbage time. It was 40-6. So finally, an opposing offense got on the board against the Bulldogs defense, but no problems there. They're 3-0. Vanderbilt next week. They'll go to 4-0. And then a kind of a fun October. Georgia will be heavily favored throughout the month against Arkansas, Auburn, Kentucky, Florida, but that's definitely their toughest month of the season by far. September's been pretty calm after the Clemson game, and not a whole lot in that November slate, based on what we know to this point. Not much else. Arkansas really impressed. No letdown at all in a classic sandwich spot between Texas and Texas A&M. Pounded Georgia Southern. That's a bad team, but even still, you thought they might be a little out of it. Looking ahead to next week's big game with A&M. They were not. KJ Jefferson good again. So impressed with the Hogs and their week-to-week consistency they've had for a year and a half now under Sam Pittman. Kentucky, I kind of liked their plan, but it almost backfired. They were losing in the fourth quarter to Chattanooga at home. they decided, you know what, we can still run the ball well last weekend against Missouri. We had to do that to win. We're playing Chattanooga today. Let's let Will Levis throw and see if he can do that. And he was okay, not great. I thought it was good to get him that experience. I don't think they ever thought the game would be that close. They probably knew it was going to be a bit of a struggle, not leaning on the run game so much yesterday. But that got a little dicey. So they survived. A little bit concerned about that passing game. But again, I think they'll go back to their bread and butter as we get into conference play again with the running game. But trying to just get a little more out of the passing game is something that can give this team a shot against teams like Florida. Probably not Georgia, but with Florida and LSU coming up. With some help from the passing game, always a good running game, always a pretty good defense. That's where Kentucky can kind of tip the scales from maybe an 8-4 season to a 10-2 season in those key swing games coming up next month. Good fight by Vanderbilt, 14-14 for a while. Stanford controlled the middle eight, those last 4 minutes of the first half, first 4 minutes of the second half. That game kind of got out of hand after that because the Cardinal dominated those key sections of the game. But Vanderbilt fought hard. Total yardage is pretty close. I think Stanford only outgained them by 25, 30 yards. So Vanderbilt, not good, but fighting hard. They'll get UConn in a couple of weeks, a game they should win. And maybe with South Carolina and Tennessee coming up, at least one or two SEC games they can at least think they can compete in. Because they hung around with a pretty good Stanford team with a really good quarterback in Tanner McKee. Again, it got a little bit out of hand in the fourth quarter. 41-23 final for the Cardinal. But another fairly impressive week, I thought, for Vanderbilt. A&M's offense a little better last week with Zach Calzada having a week to prep, knowing he was the guy. Not a totally great day against New Mexico, but 34-0. That defense is fantastic and cannot wait for next Saturday in Arlington against Arkansas. LSU offense, a nice step forward last night against Central Michigan. Pretty good MAC team. Might have an emerging player as the number 2 receiver to complement Keyshawn Butte and Deion Smith. He had 2 touchdowns last night. Defense had a touchdown to kind of put that game out of reach early. So a nice step forward for that offense. Still can't run the ball. We'll see next week at Mississippi State if that gets going. But the offense did look a bit more crisp last week than it did in the first 2 weeks. But they got to get that run game going with that schedule about to really crank up with Mississippi State next week. And then Auburn, Kentucky, Florida, Ole Miss, and just a brutal October for the Tigers. I think that's it for the SEC. Touch on some national storylines. Pac-12, another terrible day. The South went 1-5. The best game of the day, Fresno State, UCLA. I mentioned it earlier. Ended about 2:30 Eastern, 1:30 here for me. Wild shootout. Jake Haener for Fresno State, the quarterback. Gutty effort. Playing through what looked like a pretty significant hip injury. He kind of got hit from both sides late in that game. Stayed in the game, led 2 touchdown drives. And UCLA took its first loss of the year in the Rose Bowl last night. Wild win for Fresno State. But UCLA, that's not the black mark on the day for the Pac-12. That would be Arizona. They lost to FCS Northern Arizona. 15 straight losses for the Wildcats now. About to go 2 full calendar years without a win. And a complete mess there in Tucson. BYU knocked off Arizona State and Provo. They've now won 3 straight over Pac-12 South teams to start the season. Colorado, after that great effort against A&M last week, 30-0 losers to Minnesota at home. Bad day for them. Utah rallied late to get to overtime against San Diego State, but lost in the new 2-point shootout. I think it was the third overtime. San Diego State made it. Utah missed it. And the Aztecs with their second straight win over a Pac-12 team as well. USC bounced back. As I said, Keaton Slovis got hurt. Freshman Jackson Dart came off the bench. They were a mess early. It was 14-0 Washington State in the rain, and Pullman looked like another classic USC dud, but they rallied, scored 45 straight to win that game going away. And Jackson Dart might be the guy going forward. We don't know the extent of Slovis' injury, but he might have gotten Wally pipped for Lou Gehrig in the form of Jackson Dart yesterday up on the Palouse. What else? ACC, not a good day for the Coastal. Virginia Tech losing at West Virginia. Late rally came up just short. Pitt gave away a game to Western Michigan. Classic Pat Narduzzi game coming off that win over Tennessee. Losing 44-41 back at home to Western Michigan. Bad loss for Pitt with a really soft early season schedule where they should have started 5-0, and now they've taken a loss. Tough day for the Panthers. Miami blown out by Michigan State. Really impressed with Sparty so far this year. 38-17. It was a little closer than that, but Michigan State controlled the game. Kenneth Walker III looks like an all Big Ten caliber running back. Great start to the season for the Spartans with road wins now at Northwestern and at Miami. Friday night, UCF Louisville. That was a classic. Pick 6 in the final 30 seconds, wins it for Louisville. Super fun game. Always a good atmosphere there up in Louisville. That's a nice stadium. UCF falls to 2-1. Louisville improves to 2-1. Florida State popped at Wake Forest. I mean, they're not good, but still seeing Florida State 0-3. I don't know. Maybe it's the 90s child in me who grew up watching the Seminoles just win title after title in the ACC. But to see Florida State 0-3 side by side, it's just a shocking sight to see. Bowl hopes are all but probably gone now. Still got to play North Carolina. Still got to play Miami, Clemson, Florida, NC State. 5-7 at this point might be a really good finish to the season for Mike Norvell's club, but what a mess in Tallahassee, getting blown out after last week's disaster against Jacksonville State. Big Ten, mentioned Michigan State earlier. Michigan looks really good as well. 63-10, I think, against Northern Illinois yesterday. Both those teams have been really impressive through the first 3 weeks. Wolverines a bit untested. Don't think Washington was much of a challenge last week. They'll get Rutgers next week, who's 3-0 as well. Again, not an overly talented team. Michigan should win that game. But Rutgers will be a physical team, and that should be an interesting matchup to see just how far these Wolverines have come from where we thought they'd be in the preseason next week. Ohio State, not a good day against Tulsa. 500 yards for the Golden Hurricane against that Buckeyes defense, which looks completely broken at this point. There's time to fix it. But wow, it was 41-20, so the offense did pick up the pace in the second half to pull away. But overall, still major concerns for Ohio State on the defensive side of the ball. I think that's it for the Big Ten. Big 12, Oklahoma, Nebraska, tight game. Oklahoma just can't put a complete game together. Defense was not good in week 1 against Tulane. Offense struggled a lot yesterday against Nebraska. Got a big blocked extra point return for 2 points when it should have been 14-10. It ended up being 16-9. Oklahoma scored to go up by 2 scores. Nebraska tried to rally late but ran out of time. So fun seeing a close game between Nebraska and Oklahoma, but a lot of concerns again for the Sooners coming out of that one. And some others. Notre Dame defense looked pretty good against Purdue, 27-13. Offense did not look great yesterday. They were out of sorts. Jack Cohn, not his best day, had some drops. Offensive line still not great. They might have been a little better yesterday, but Wisconsin next week, huge test for the Irish, who have yet to play a complete game. I think their ceiling's still pretty high because both units have a pretty high ceiling, but they have not come together yet through the first 3 weeks and played a complete game. Play of the day, SMU beats Louisiana Tech on a Hail Mary. Check out that video. Wild ending there, tip pass, and the Mustangs steal a game that they probably should have lost in Ruston against Louisiana Tech. And I think that's it. I guess the ACC, I did miss Clemson, 14-8 over Georgia Tech. That offense is something else right now. 14 points against Georgia Tech. That's not a good effort. Yellow Jackets, not a good team. They fought hard, had a weather delay, but DJ Uyunglele just looks like he still hasn't quite recovered from that Georgia game. Did they break him? I don't know. There's still time to recover. It's the ACC. But Clemson's got to go to NC State next week. That might be the second or third best team in the league, despite their bad loss last week in Starkville. They've played Clemson tough a couple times in the past. So that offense really needs to get going, as good as that defense is. You can't just keep relying on that defense to hold teams to 7-10 points. So there's talent there. Not going to quite write Clemson off yet, but that's 3 weeks in a row now. This offense has looked out of sorts with Uyunglele. We expected a dip back from last year, obviously, but this is pretty surprising. So keep an eye on the Tigers as to whether this offense does get going or not. If not, they're going to take a loss somewhere in ACC play. It's not a good league, but again, you just can't keep up that inefficiency on offense and keep winning games, even with as much talent as Clemson has. So my top 10 right now, I wait till week 3 to do rankings. I'm very resume focused. I don't really look at who I would predict to win games if they played next week. So I have Arkansas, number 10 right now. Then I have Clemson, number 9. I think they were still good enough against Georgia, who's proven to be one of the top 2 best teams in the country. I'm not going to ding them too much, even though they haven't looked good at all the last 2 weeks. Florida, number 8, probably bumping them up a spot from where they would have been last week for taking Alabama to the wire. Oklahoma at number 7, they might be a little high, given they haven't really looked good at all outside of their FCS game. So don't love that slot for them, but they're 3-0, got the job done, beat a decent Nebraska team, a decent Tulane team, so they're in at number 7. Number 6 is Ole Miss. They've been fantastic through 3 weeks. Again, the Alabama showdown in 2 weeks will tell us a lot more. Oregon at number 5, kind of a sloppy day yesterday against Stony Brook. That was expected, but have the huge win at Ohio State, beat a good Fresno State team. Ducks are number 5 right now. Penn State number 4, 2 nice wins for them against Wisconsin and Auburn now. I have Iowa at number 3, also with 2 nice wins, but in more dominant fashion against Indiana and Iowa State, and a pretty good one yesterday against Kent State in a letdown spot, beating a MAC title contender with ease, 30-7 there. Georgia number 2, Alabama number 1. So that's my top 10 right now. We look ahead to week 4, not a good slate next week. The late afternoon window is okay. That's where you got A&M and Arkansas. You got Rutgers and Michigan in there. Clemson, NC State's a 3:30 Eastern kick as well. So a couple of good games in that window. Early window has 2 good games. Notre Dame, Wisconsin at Soldier Field in Chicago. Fun matchup there between 2 teams who hardly ever play. Then LSU, Mississippi State, a huge game in the SEC West, as one team's going to take their second loss on Saturday. And whoever it is, it's going to be tough sledding ahead getting into the meat of conference play. Primetime window is gross. There's really not much. West Virginia at Oklahoma. If that game were in Morgantown, I'd be a bit more excited. West Virginia's pretty good, and again, the Sooners haven't looked great, so they might have something for them. But other than that, not much else. K-State, Oklahoma State's fun, but that's a streaming-only game on ESPN+. Yuck. Tennessee, Florida, nothing like the Tennessee, Florida games I grew up with, and even the Pac-12 after dark is pretty crappy next week as well. So not a great slate. First 2 weekends of October look fantastic, so we'll get some upsets we don't expect next week. Might be better than we think, but overall, not a great week 4 slate. I'll, of course, dive into that much more midweek with my week 4 preview. So I will wrap it up there. Busy Sunday ahead, so I'll cut it off. Thanks so much for watching this, guys. Please subscribe. Let me know in the comments below. Reach out to me on Twitter at MattSmithCFB. Got my full top 25 up there beyond the top 10, so please check that out. Written recap up shortly at southernpigskin.com to recap all the week with my thoughts in word form. And thanks so much for watching, guys, again, and I will talk to y'all soon.